This video is brought to you by Brilliant. On Sunday, Portugal went to the polls for its second general election in just over 2 years, a few months after the Socialist Party's majority government collapsed in scandal. The election was nominally won by a coalition led by centre-right Social Democrats, but they fell a long way short of a majority. And in some sense, the real winner was Chega, an anti-establishment right-wing upstart who won an impressive 48 seats. So in this video, we're going to have a look at Sunday's election results, what they say about Portuguese politics, and what's going to happen next. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start with a bit of context. Like many European countries, since becoming a democracy in the 70s, Portuguese politics has been dominated by two parties: the more left-wing Socialist Party and the more right-wing Social Democrats. Because Portugal uses a broadly proportional electoral system, these two parties usually have to form coalitions with smaller parties to form a governing majority. For context, Portugal uses a proportional representation electoral system, with multi-seat constituencies, with seats within these constituencies allocated via the D'Hondt method. Because the D'Hondt method implies a relatively high vote threshold, which in turn disadvantages smaller parties, this means that big parties generally receive slightly more seats than votes. Nonetheless, the system is still broadly proportional, which means outright single-party majorities are pretty rare in Portuguese politics. In fact, this has only ever happened 4 times. The Social Democrats won outright majorities in 1987 and 1991, and the Socialists won outright majorities in 2005 and 2022. Yep, you heard that right. Only 2 years ago, under the leadership of Antonio Costa, the Socialists won a 120-seat majority in Portugal's 230-seat legislature, on 41% of the popular vote. This was Costa's second successive win at the ballot box, and his success sparked interest in the international media about why Portugal seemed immune to the wave of anti-establishment right-wing politics sweeping Europe. Unfortunately for centrist dads everywhere, Costa's government was permanently mired in scandal, with 13 ministerial sackings or resignations in just its first 18 months, and collapsed late last year after prosecutors raided a number of government departments as part of an investigation called Operation Influencer into alleged corruption surrounding lithium exploration and hydrogen projects. Costa formally resigned after the budget on December the 8th, and elections were called for March the 10th, i.e. Sunday. Now, you might have expected this election to have been an easy win for the Social Democrats, given the Socialists' various crises and corruption scandals. However, in part because the Social Democrats were struggling with their own corruption scandals, this isn't how things panned out. The Social Democrats' polling was pretty miserable, and they were actually behind the Socialists until a month or so ago, when they formed a coalition with a couple of smaller centre-right parties: the People's Party, or CDS, and the People's Monarchist Party, or PPM. This coalition was known as Democratic Alliance, and it was actually originally created to contest the 1979 election, where the Democratic Alliance usurped the incumbent Socialist Party. For their part, the Socialists replaced Costa with former Infrastructure Minister Pedro Nuno Santos, but he isn't a particularly popular politician in Portugal. This is both because Santos was actually involved in one of the Socialists' various scandals last Parliament, which is why he stepped down as Infrastructure Minister in December 2022, and because he's on the left of the party, which apparently put off some more moderate voters. The shortcomings of the two main parties created the political space for Chega, a right-wing anti-establishment party formed in 2019. We've done a whole video on Chega's policy platform in the past, so go and watch that if you want to know more. But the TLDR is that they're on the right on cultural and social issues, especially stuff like immigration, but their economic policy is less consistent. Their manifesto sounds very right-wing. It includes stuff like shrinking the state and cutting taxes, but they've come out in support of some more left-wing big state policies recently to broaden their electoral appeal, including a higher minimum wage, state ownership of various industries, and generous agricultural subsidies. Anyway, according to provisional results, the election was won by the Democratic Alliance, who took 29.5% of the popular vote and 79 seats in the 230-seat legislature. The Socialists came close behind, with 28.7% of the vote and 77 seats, and Schäger came in third, with 18.1% of the vote and 48 seats. Now, this election has been described as a victory for the right in much of the international media. Of course, this is in some sense true, given that the centre-right Democratic Alliance won a plurality and the right-wing Schäger came third. But as we see it, this election was as much, if not more, about the collapse of Portugal's political establishment. The two established parties won less than 60% between them, one of the lowest collective shares in Portugal's democratic history, and many Portuguese people apparently feel that the two-party duopoly has just failed to get to grips with some of the structural issues affecting Portugal's society and economy, especially its housing crisis, which is one of the worst in Europe. This anti-establishment sentiment could also explain the historically high turnout, which came in at over 66%, about 15% higher than in 2022. We often take high turnout to be a symptom of good health in a democracy, but high turnout can also be a sign that people want change. If voters who would otherwise stay at home decide to turn out in an attempt to oust the incumbent. So what happens next? Well, the leader of the Social Democrats, Luis Montenegro, explicitly ruled out any deals with Schäger because of, in his words, their racist, populist and excessively demagogic views. But it's unclear how the Democratic Alliance could form a functioning majority without them. Just looking at the parliamentary arithmetic, the only real alternative to a majority is a grand coalition with the Socialists. But recent history suggests that this isn't a good way of dealing with anti-establishment parties. The rise of anti-establishment, often Eurosceptic parties in the late 2000s and 2010s across Europe made it harder for establishment parties to form functioning majorities. But instead of forming coalitions with these new parties, many establishment parties responded by forming grand coalitions with other established parties across the aisle. Somewhat unsurprisingly, these tended to burnish the Eurosceptic parties' anti-establishment credentials, and made them more popular. Italy's political class, for example, resorted to a grand coalition after the anti-establishment Five Star Party won 25% of the vote in 2013, only for Five Star to win a plurality at the next election in 2018. Similarly, Germany's political class resorted to a grand coalition after the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats had their vote share squeezed in 2017. But while this sort of worked for a bit, the anti-establishment AfD are now more popular than ever. The point we're making is that so-called cordon sanitaires are rarely permanent solutions to the rise of anti-establishment parties and sentiment, which leaves the Social Democrats with an uncomfortable dilemma about what to do next. A lot of stuff that we talk about at TLDR News can seem pretty complicated, especially when we dive into economics and detailed data, which is why we use Brilliant.org to keep us sharp. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. Brilliant is a learning platform designed to be uniquely effective. Their first principles approach helps you build understanding from the ground up, which is also how we structure TLDR videos. Each lesson is filled with hands-on problem solving that lets you play with concepts, a method proven to be 6 times more effective than just watching lectures. Plus, all content on Brilliant is crafted by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from MIT, Caltech, Duke, Microsoft, Google, and more. Brilliant helps build your critical thinking skills through problem solving, not memorizing. So, while you're building real knowledge on specific topics, you'll also be becoming a better thinker. Learning a little every day is one of the most important things you can do, both for your personal and professional growth. Brilliant helps you build real knowledge in minutes a day, with fun lessons you can do whenever you have time. It's the opposite of mindless scrolling. Brilliant recently launched a ton of new content in data, all of which uses real-world data to train you to see trends and make better informed decisions, something politicians could really learn from. Anyway, these are for learners of any level to start or continue learning data analysis, with a fully built-out suite of new content, from Bayes' theorem to multiple linear regression. And you can truly learn by doing, as you'll be working with real datasets from sources like Starbucks, Twitter, Spotify, and more. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, click on the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks for watching, and thanks to Brilliant for their support of TLDR News.